morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How's everybody doing today? Thank you for coming out so bright and early. Have you all had some coffee? Okay, so we're ready to go. I want to thank GANT and thank Louise and everyone on the team for having me, and thank you all so much for coming out today. I'm so excited to be here in Sweden. I came to Sweden my first time 4 years ago, and I've come back to Sweden every year in the summer since. And this past summer, I didn't get to come back to Sweden, and so I was very disappointed, very sad. So I'm very excited to have had this opportunity to come here now in October for the first time, to be here in the fall, which is beautiful. And also got to bring my 10-year-old son, Jack. It's his first time to Sweden. His little sister, Summer, was unable to make it. But Jack and Summer love it when I come to Sweden. And I thought it was going to be because I bring back all the candy from Sweden, which is so amazing. It's like the home of gummy candy. Although I've never once seen a Swedish fish anywhere in any of the candy stores. It's almost like going to France and you never see a French fry. But we do see all this amazing gummy candy, but it's actually not the gummy candy they love. It's they bring back the jars of fish roe and the tubes of Kalles. Kalles, am I pronouncing it? Kalles, okay. I may say a few Swedish terms today that I butcher and say them incorrectly, and I apologize in advance. You can just sort of shake your head if I get it totally wrong. But I love coming to Sweden, and in the 4 years that I've been coming, I find it to be such a friendly and warm and beautiful country. I've had the pleasure of spending midsummer, so learning how to celebrate midsummer, I think, with the frog dance in the archipelago last summer. Gone fly fishing in Lycksele, and fly fishing around Nasaker, and walking around Umeå, and also the vibrant streets of Stockholm. So I've had an amazing time seeing different parts of the country. I've yet to go south, but I'm looking forward to it. And when I come to Sweden, a lot of the times I spend time with our Swedish waterkeepers, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about what a waterkeeper is. But here in Sweden, we've got two of our network organizations up north. Is the Swedish Baltic Rivers Waterkeeper and Älvdalarnas Waterkeeper. And so I've been able to go out and see a lot of the ecological treasures of Sweden with those groups, and seeing some of the beautiful waterways and some of the astounding natural resources here in Sweden. And at the same time, they've shown me some of the ecological challenges of Sweden. And in particular, it's amazing to me is that in Sweden, virtually all of your energy comes from fossil fuel-free sources, and which is fantastic. I wish I could say the same for my country, but we seem to just want more oil and gas. But here in Sweden, it's fossil fuel free. Of course, on the other side of that, about 40% of that fossil fuel energy, free energy, comes from hydropower dams, and those dams do have significant impacts on rivers and on two of the Swedish icons with the wild salmon and sea trout. And about 80% of Sweden's rivers are impacted by more than 11,000 dams. And so, but the good part about that, though, is almost all of those dams, hardly any of those dams are actually making large amounts of energy. Only about 200 or so are actually making significant amounts of energy. So that means that more than 10,000 of them are useless, and they could be taken down to restore the rivers. In fact, the first time I was here last year, the first day I was here last year, there was an announcement that one of the major dams on a wild salmon river was going to be decommissioned and taken down. It was a fight that our waterkeepers had been battling for 7 years, and so they were very excited to see this dam was going to be taken down, and it was going to restore 1/3 of the river's ecosystem. And it was an old wild salmon river. In fact, there were historically, I think, 80 wild salmon rivers in Sweden, and today there are fewer than 30 because of those dams. And so they have a lot of work on their hands, our Swedish waterkeepers, in trying to get some of those 11,000 dams taken down to restore some of the ecosystem. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about Swedish water and environmental issues because I think the crowd will know more than I do. I'm sure of that, actually. I do have with me, though, a couple copies of a Swedish magazine, a Swedish fishing magazine, which tells more of the story of my organization and also about dams in Sweden and some of the work that our waterkeepers are doing in Sweden. So if anybody's interested, I can give you one afterwards, or I'm also happy to connect you with our waterkeepers up in Sweden. What I am here to talk about today is water. I'm going to talk about the global water crisis and my organization, Waterkeeper Alliance, which is the fastest growing and largest nonprofit focused on clean water, and about our plans and our work to address the global water crisis. First, I do want to stop again and say how honored it is to be invited for GANT talks, and I love the Never Stop Learning tagline and think it's so important that we live by that day in and day out. And it's a real honor to be here. I've had a chance to work with the GANT team a number of times over the years, and I realized when Jack and I were on the train from Arlanda coming into Central Station, I realized that despite meeting a number of the members of the GANT team over the past couple of years, I've never told them my personal GANT brand story, which this month turns 25 years old. So, and it had such an impact on me. If I could take 2 minutes, just tell you my GANT story. Besides the GANT clothing I'm wearing today, I have more GANT shirts and jackets back at my house in New York. And it all comes from just a small little, I think, funny story from when I was growing up. So when I was a boy, I was growing up in a state called Pennsylvania in the US. And I was in a very small town, and this was well before online shopping. So you were limited to buying whatever was in the buildings in the shops in your town. And in my town, my small town, the shops were limited options, and they weren't very good. And so not a lot of shopping experiences. But when I moved to New York City in 1993, so 25 years ago. I was about 22 years old. And I remember I'd been to New York City before, so I knew there were lots of shopping options. It was amazing shopping opportunities and the variety of stores. But when you live there, then you start to experience it. And right around this time, in September, October of 1993, I moved there and I needed to get some clothes. And so I walked around the city and I stumbled into a GANT store on Fifth Avenue. And I don't think that store's there anymore, it's moved. But I stumbled into this Fifth Avenue GANT store, and immediately when I walked in, a friendly salesperson came up to me, and he asked me for what I was looking for. I said, well, a couple shirts, maybe a jacket, maybe some pants. And then he asked me for my size, and I told him my size. And then he actually walked me over to a chair, and he asked me if I wanted to sit down in this comfortable chair, and if I would like a crisp, cold beer. I was 22 years old. I thought I was in heaven. I thought, oh my God, is this how you shop in New York City? This is amazing, I love it here. It's not actually how you shop in New York City, it just happened to be an experience unique to GANT. And so I got to sit there and drink a beer while someone went shopping for me. It was the most fantastic experience I ever had. And so GANT forever stuck in my head. And it was such a powerful experience. It's one of the only shopping experiences I still remember today. I don't remember any of my other shopping experiences, but I remember the GANT experience. And so I've always thought of GANT as one of those iconic brands that is committed to quality and excellence and the customer experience. And that's, at my organization, Waterkeeper Alliance, we always look to partner with brands that are committed to excellence and quality and the customer experience, and also to brands that are not looking to just meet industry standards, but to raise them up. And we're really happy to be working with GANT on the global water crisis. So I'm going to start for a second with a video about my organization, and then we'll talk a little bit about water. If I can get this to work.
The New York Times reports today that human activities are primarily responsible for recent climate change.
80% من شركات المياه في لبنان
The
اليوم.
Ohio ranks as the most polluted river in the United States for the 7th year in a row. This is what makes us unique, because you have this relationship with the land, and that's going to be the source of your values and your virtues and your character as a people. This is what makes us unique, because when you're alone on that river, and we're back in touch again with the 10,000 generations of human beings that were here before there were laptops. We go there because we get renewed. And we need to offer that opportunity to the poorest people in our communities, and that's what we're fighting for. And any time you see environmental injury, you will also see this subversion of democracy. What you do is so ennobling and so important. You are the template for morality, because you are fighting to preserve our values and our moral obligations to our children. Every child, whether they're black or white, humble or noble, rich or poor, this waterway belongs to you. The burden is on us to carry that message to every corner of the globe and to fight back and not let them take the cauldron of democracy that is represented by waterways in our communities.
So that's a little introduction to our organization. For a little more background, we're a global organization uniting more than 300 locally based clean water advocacy organizations, and we focus citizen action on issues that affect our waterways, from pollution to climate change. And Waterkeeper Alliance was incorporated as a nonprofit business entity in 1999, but we trace our roots back to the Hudson River in New York back in the 1960s. And back in the 1960s, this was when a group of blue-collar recreational and commercial fishermen united together and banded together to save a dying river and take it back from the polluters and give it back to the people, its true owners. This was in the 1960s. The Hudson River was historically, it's an iconic American river. It was one of the most biologically rich and biologically diverse waterways in the North Atlantic. But by the 1960s, the river was almost dead. There was a railroad company called Penn Central Railroad that was discharging 1 million gallons of oil into the river every day. There was General Motors, the automotive company. People could tell in the 1960s what color they were painting their cars because the river would change colors. So it would turn yellow or turn green because they were dumping the paint right into the river. So because of the growth of New York City up along the river, all of the pollution going into the river was killing all of the fish. It was making the river virtually dead. In the 1960s, no one in New York went on the river, in the river, or around the river. It was something you stayed away from. The property values along the river were plummeted. But these fishermen, they got together and they had been fishing the river for generations. It was something they learned from their parents and learned from their grandparents, and it was something they were going to pass on as a trade to their sons and daughters. But they were seeing that they were no longer able to make a living. They weren't able to put food on their plate to feed their children and their families, and they weren't able to recreate on the river. And so they got together in the 1960s and they started, these fishermen, there were about 60 of them got together in a room and in 1966, and they started talking about things that they could do to fix this problem. And none of them really, they weren't environmental lawyers or they weren't biologists or chemists, but they were fishermen who worked on the river every day, and they understood the lifeblood of the river, the rhythm of the river. They knew something was wrong, but they didn't know how to fix it. One of the fishermen was angry, and he said, well, we should take a mattress and we should shove it up the pipes of that railroad company and make the oil flood out the railroad yard. Another one said, no, we should take a raft and we should put dynamite on it and we should shove it up the power plants because they're killing all the fish. And they were talking all sorts of violence because they were so angry because they were seeing these polluters get rich while they were getting poor. But fortunately, there was a gentleman in the room that had done some research, and he found that what the polluters was doing was illegal. And he said to the fishermen, we shouldn't break the law, we should enforce the law. And the fishermen listened to this gentleman, his name was Bob, and they listened to Bob, and they decided to follow Bob and his bold idea of starting to use the law to go after the polluters. So the fishermen started patrolling the river. They identified pollution problems, they gathered evidence of the law breaking, and they forced polluters to clean up their mess. And because of their commitment to citizen action and science and the law, they got the railroad company to stop discharging oil. They got the General Motors to stop dumping paint into the river. They got the towns up and down the river to stop dumping sewage into the river. And all these other problems, they started getting cleaned up. And because of their work, today the Hudson River is cleaner than it's been in more than 50 years. And today the river is considered to be internationally, I go around the world and people know the Hudson River as a story of an icon of ecosystem revitalization, as a success story of where a river was dying and people were able to bring it back to life because of citizen action and science and the law. And so the success that those fishermen had, those fishermen ultimately became Hudson Riverkeeper. They were our very first Waterkeeper organization. Because of the success they had at restoring the Hudson River back to life, they inspired hundreds of groups all around the world to do the same type of thing. So now today we've got 340 Waterkeeper organizations in 44 countries on 6 continents, and they were all inspired by that original group of fishermen on the Hudson in the 1960s. These 340 organizations that we work with in 44 countries are patrolling and protecting more than 7 million square kilometers of watershed around the world for just under 1 billion people, protecting everyone's right to clean water. And we've got these waterkeepers they're in China, India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Togo, Kenya, Senegal, Sweden, Belize, Chile, Argentina, across the United States, Canada, and beyond. And because they're in so many different locations, they're obviously a very diverse group of advocates with different languages, and different religions, different cultures, like different legal and political frameworks. But they're all united by one very common, strong bond, and that's everyone has a right to clean water. And they very much believe that everyone has a right to clean water. And if someone asks me, what does a waterkeeper do? Well, to me, one thing I'll say is the waterkeepers, they follow in the footsteps of those fishermen on the Hudson River. They protect their waterway and the community that uses it by going out and looking for pollution problems and then figuring out ways to solve them using science and law and citizen action. They work to be the eyes and ears of their community's waterway and work to protect it on behalf of the community so that everyone has clean water. And the big picture way that I look at it too is that these groups, these in 44 countries, are working together to create a world where everyone can go down to their local waterway and jump in and have a swim without fear of getting sick. Or everyone can go to their water source and fill up a glass and drink it without fear that they're going to poison themselves with toxic chemicals. Or that creating a world where everyone can go down to their lake, river, stream, or bay, throw in a line and catch a fish, and bring it home and feed it to their family without fear that they're going to poison their family with mercury or PCBs. So that's a pretty good world, right? Where everyone has clean water for drinking, swimming, and fishing. Yeah, and but as everyone in this room knows, it's not the world we're living in, right? We unfortunately are living in a world where we've got a global climate and water crisis. Climate change is altering the chemistry of our oceans, the character of our coastlines, the timing and intensity of rain and snow, wreaking havoc all around the planet. We've got a water quantity problem, and we've got a water quality problem. Available water supplies in many parts of the world are shrinking, and it's estimated by 2025, 1.8 billion people will live in areas of water scarcity. That's only a little over 6 years away. 2/3 of the global population will live in areas that are water stressed. And what little water we do have remaining in areas, we're poisoning. We are dumping 2 million tons of industrial, agricultural, and sewage waste into our planet's waterways every single day. And those water quantity problems and water quality problems are leading to a public health crisis. Experts say that 1 out of 2, or 50% of the hospital beds on this planet are filled with someone with a waterborne illness. 1 out of 2. So either maybe they're in the hospital because they drank water that was contaminated with fossil fuels, or maybe they didn't have enough water to drink because they live in an area of drought that's exacerbated by climate change. 1 out of 2 hospital beds. 3.2 million children under the age of 5 are going to die this year because of lack of access to clean water and poor sanitation. And more people die annually from water-related issues than from all forms of violence, including war. And we aren't just content in sort of poisoning our fresh water as well. We're also destroying our oceans. And as we know, our oceans they provide more than half of our oxygen. They provide us with a bounty of fish to eat. And they regulate our climate, among so many other things that they provide us. But we're damaging our oceans as well. One of the biggest challenges that we have to our marine ecosystem today is plastic pollution. You probably read about it. It's in the news quite a bit, the plastic pollution. Particularly the issue is with single-use plastic and the explosion of single-use plastic, those plastic forks and knives and the little plastic bags that people use for 5 minutes and then throw away. 50% of the plastic that we use it just once and we throw it away. And a lot of that ends up in the ocean. 32%, almost 1/3 of the plastic we use goes in the ocean. And that takes 500 to 1,000 years to degrade. Think about how much it is. Their plastic last year, they estimated 8 million tons of plastic went to our oceans. And we can try to visualize what's 8 million tons. There's 2 ways I can think of. I'm from New York, so I've got a New York way of looking at it. Has everybody been to or seen the Empire State Building? Right, okay. So let's fill the Empire State Building up with plastic from all the way at the bottom, all the way to the top. Now let's fill up another Empire State Building from the bottom to the top, and a third Empire State Building from the bottom all the way to the top with plastic, and dump all that into the ocean. That was 8 million tons of plastic. Another way to look at it would be a garbage truck. I saw one out front when I got here this morning, a garbage truck. Let's fill a garbage truck full of plastic and then drive it to the dock on the ocean and dump the plastic into the ocean. Let's have another truck come a minute later, and 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 then have another one come every minute of every hour of every day for an entire year. That's 8 million tons of plastic going into the ocean. This plastic gets into our food chain, and it also wreaks havoc on marine life. There's 1 million seabirds a year, and 100,000 marine mammals a year die from plastic pollution. And the kicker is that by 2050, experts predict there's going to be more plastic in our oceans than fish. Can you imagine raising our children and grandchildren in a world where there's more plastic than fish in the ocean? It's crazy. But I know that's enough doom and gloom. I've been a lot of doom and gloom right there. I'm here to also talk about how we can solve these problems. And we have the ability to fix these problems. I believe that humans have the ingenuity to solve the global climate and water crisis, but we've got a lot of work on our hands. Because we have got a lot of adversaries against us. There are the deep-pocketed, wealthy fossil fuel companies and all of the politicians that they bought and they paid for. And those are big opponents to deal with. I mean, and they're trying to squeeze every last drop of oil out of the ground that they can and get their greedy hands on every last dollar that they can. Because they know that they're like dinosaurs headed towards extinction. But our job together is to push them towards extinction faster. I don't know if you have in Sweden do you have the Roadrunner cartoons? Do you know the Roadrunner cartoon maybe? There's some of the cartoons where you see the cartoon characters, like they've got they're falling off a cliff and they're holding on just barely. Like, it's our job to look at them as the fossil fuel industry and just pushing on, kicking on their fingers and make them go down faster. And we have the power to do that because one of the things that they might have a lot of money, but what we have is we've got people power. There are more of us than there are of them. And we've got science on our side and we've got the law on our side, but we need to use it more effectively. At my organization, at Waterkeeper Alliance, we believe in that change happens at the local level, and that at the local level is where you can make the biggest difference. Decisions about energy, consumer choices, transportation choices, all of these things happen at the local level. The biggest difference you can make is at the local level. I mean, I say thank God for that all the time when I know what I've got back home as a president. That thankfully the local level is where the most important things happen, and he can't touch that. But at the local level, we can make the biggest change. And locally is where our waterkeepers around the world are working to make a difference. So I enjoy, one of the things that keeps me optimistic about the future and about dealing with the climate crisis and the water crisis is the success I see from on the local level, from local groups. And maybe it's the Swedish groups that I work with that we're having success having a major dam taken down that's going to restore a third of a wild salmon river. I see it happen all over the world. Our Columbia Riverkeeper in Oregon has been successful in using grassroots organizing and legal strategies to defeat 3 fossil fuel export terminals, liquefied natural gas and coal terminals, that have been proposed in their communities over the past 5 years. I've seen our Han Baykeeper in Senegal get the community organized and stop the construction of 2 coal-fired power plants in their community just in the past 2 years. I've seen our Hoang River Waterkeeper in Vietnam be able to successfully use ecosystem-based adaptation strategies to help increase flood resilience in their urban and coastal areas and restoring mangroves to help protect the community. I've seen our Miami Waterkeeper in Florida use legal action to require sea level rise planning for their community. Just earlier this week, I saw our Sarasota Waterkeeper in Florida have a successful lawsuit settled against a major city in Florida that was discharging raw sewage into their waterways. That's going to stop. I've seen communities all over the world rise up and have these types of successes, including, I also want to add Costa Rica, where we have waterkeepers, in Mexico that are working to add plastic recycling infrastructure in their communities and educational programs that get people to start recycling and to stop using as much plastic, but to keep the plastic from going into the ocean. And then the plastic that they recover in these plastic recycling facilities, they gather together and they give it to a partner that turns it into a long-term product that can be used again and again. And I brought an example of something like that, which is from the GANT Beacon project. This shirt is made from ocean plastic. These can be, we can make soccer balls, shirts, shoes, all sorts of things out of this recovered ocean plastic. But the point is that I get to see local victories all over the world and see it all come together from a global view and know there's hope for the future. And because we believe so much in the future and in local action, my organization, Waterkeeper Alliance, recently made a climate and water commitment. I made the commitment at the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco a few weeks ago. Our commitment is based on a 20-year plan that we've recently finished called Project Osiris. It's named after the Egyptian god of regeneration. And it aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals number 6 on clean water and sanitation. Our commitment is that we are committed to growing the civil society sector of water advocates. And to do that, we're going to be scaling our organization over the next 20 years to ensure that we create a trained and effective local leader, a local waterkeeper on every habitable watershed on this planet over the next 20 years. So we can continue to see the successes like I've just talked about. And in doing that, we're going to start the first 5 years, we're going to focus on 15 iconic and endangered waterways. We're looking at the Amazon, the Brahmaputra, the Danube, the Mekong, the Nile, and more. And we believe that there should be a trained, effective, clean water advocate on every waterway on this planet. And everyone here and everyone on this planet has a role in engaging and being part of the solution for the future. And what I like to tell people is one of the most important things to do is for you to think about why is it important to you. So if you think about why is clean water important to you, or why is a healthy climate important to you. And the more you spend time thinking about why it's important to you, it's easier for you to sort of become more aware of it and become more engaged. We can start with a very simple thing, is that we know we need clean water to live, right? That's probably a pretty compelling reason to get engaged and to be in care and be involved, because we need it to live. But there may be other reasons that you care about clean water, why water is important to you. I think about, in this room, think about where you go for a holiday or for a long weekend. Would it be the beach or on the water somewhere, out in the archipelago, somewhere where you're near water, right, for most of you? And I think that's because we know that being in and around water makes us happier, it makes us healthier, it reduces stress, and it brings us peace. And do we really want to have that peace shattered by fossil fuel pollution or by plastic? I don't think so. It can be even more personal than that. I'll share my reason why. I grew up, as I mentioned, I grew up in Pennsylvania. And when I was a boy, I went swimming and fishing almost every day. And I thought when I was growing up, when I was a boy, I thought that every kid could do that. I thought everybody went and swam in their local creek, and that everyone just could get a glass of water and drink it anytime they wanted to, and everybody could eat a fish that they caught. And when I became a teenager, I realized that wasn't the case, because I started reading and I was traveling more, and I was seeing that that was not the case all around the world. There were people that didn't have enough water to drink, or couldn't eat the fish out of their waterway, or couldn't go for a swim. And so that injustice is what inspired me that was my why. That was why I cared about it, because I thought that everyone should have had that opportunity and should have that opportunity. And that was an injustice. It's transitioned as I've gotten older. My why has transitioned. I've got a 10-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, and they mean the world to me. And I want them to grow up with clean air and clean water and good jobs and clean energy and equality. And I don't want to look back in 20 years and wonder if there was more I could have done to ensure a healthy and safe future for them. And I believe that we owe it to these future generations to give them a better world than what we inherited, and not a world where there's more plastic than fish in the ocean. And I think we can do a better job of that, and we have the ability, we've got the ingenuity to fix that. We can reshape the future so that everyone has clean water, but we all have to play a role in it. And we've all got to be able to come together and look at the power of possibility, the possibility that yes, everyone can have clean water. And we've got to harness that power of possibility and create a world where everyone can, row in the waters of prosperity and dignity and human aspiration. And that's the world that I imagine for my children and the future that I imagine. And I'm so grateful that there are places like Sweden that are so far advanced in compared to many other places in terms of these issues. But I hope you all join us on this, and I hope that we can count on everyone to be engaged in this battle, because it's so important. And thank you all very much for having me today.